Now, for more details, we are now being joined live by our correspondent, Jagriti Dave from Washington, D.C. Thanks for joining us, Jagriti. And now we are now hearing that the police is using tear gas near even the peaceful protests near the White House. And in fact, the U.S. president is threatening protesters with a military crackdown. So what is really happening on ground?
Yes, the president gave a statement at the White House, the Rose Garden of the White House, after a weekend where he had stayed silent. There were reports that Friday's protests had worried Secret Service agents to the extent that they took the president to an underground bunker at the White House for his own safety. The president came out today and talked about how he characterized himself as the president of law and order and that he was an ally of peaceful protesters. But as he said this, you could hear the bangs from outside of the White House coming from those protests. And this, as he was speaking, these peaceful protesters were being tear-gassed to be dispersed so that after the president had spoken, the way was clear for him to walk across the way and go and visit the historic church of St. John's Episcopal Church that had been damaged in last night's protests. And there he stood outside with a Bible in his hand in what many have described as a photo opportunity. Many have criticised for many religious leaders, including the bishop that oversees the church, criticising him for using the church and for using the Bible for a political point-scoring exercise.
Right. Now, we know that these protesters are demanding that all officers involved in this gruesome incident be arrested. But are there also other pent-up issues amounting in the black population in America, which have now led to this huge uprising?
Well, the death of George Floyd last week was one of many incidents of unarmed black man dying in police custody. And activists say this is happening time and time again. And this is something that has been building up to simmering point. We've seen protests in the United States after the death of African Americans in police custody. We saw it 5 years ago in Baltimore after the death of Freddie Gray. And there have been others, countless others. And this is one of the simmering tensions in the United States, the relationship between the black community and law enforcement.
Right. Now, what lies ahead? We know that this racial unrest comes at a time that COVID-19 cases continue to mount up in the United States. This is also the election year, and Americans are already disappointed with the Trump administration's response to the pandemic. And this uprising seems to be only adding to the Trump administration's woes. So what lies ahead in the coming days?
Well, it's difficult to see. You mentioned COVID-19. This is something that officials are most certainly concerned about, a spike in cases because of people attending protests. By definition, these protests are not places where you can socially distance, and many protesters are out without masks and other protective gear on. So that is a significant concern. But this is a country that is, as you say, has been hit by huge unemployment as a result of the coronavirus. And now we're seeing curfews extended across several cities in the country as a result of these protests. And the president's actions and his rhetoric today really speaks in many ways to the election and to the fact that he needs to be seen to be taking control as a president of law and order. But it remains to be seen whether this rhetoric is more effective than maybe the rhetoric that other people would have liked to have heard, perhaps the language of healing and calm. There's here in Washington, D.C., there's another curfew in place from 7 p.m. So clearly officials are expecting further protests to continue tomorrow. So we'll have to wait and see exactly how long these uprisings extend here in Washington, D.C., but also across the whole of the United States.
Right, Jagriti. Now, my final question, the world currently is watching these protests unfold, and some powerful visuals are emerging across different platforms. And there seem to be two sides, or two faces rather, of these protests. The peaceful ones, which are garnering massive support across the world. And then there are these images of looting, arson and vandalism, which many are now saying are damaging to the Black Lives Matter movement. So what really lies ahead for this uprising in the coming weeks?
It's a tension that is playing out. Activists in the Black Lives Matter movement are organising protests here in DC. There was a caravan, a peaceful caravan that they'd organised yesterday, and they. There's one the leader of the DC chapter was giving an interview today where she said that she doesn't want to police how other people protest. There is a genuine sense of solidarity amongst many activists as to how they go about protesting. But of course, it is shocking to see the images of looting that is taking place here in Washington DC. There are boarded up shops, windows that had been smashed in, shops that are trying to prevent any damage to their properties taking place. And there are, there were questions that about whether the looting is taking away from the message of the protest itself. It's something that the brother of George Floyd is saying in terms of the need for peace, to remember his brother by and for effective change to take place. But, The relationship, the racial tensions here in the United States are at a simmering point. They're bubbling over. And again, it's difficult to see going ahead what happens with the movement, what happens with the issue of racial injustice here in the United States, and to what extent the damage that's occurred across cities takes away from the central message of protesters in in cities across the United States that think something has to change.
Right. All right, Jagati, thank you so much for joining us and for all your inputs.